Right, so AEW has a very loaded roster with nearly 200 wrestlers signed to its roster, and with only 3 hours of TV a week, it means the spots are limited. And with that, it means many wrestlers are left on the shelf without anything to do, and it leads to wrestlers in AEW having stop-start pushes, but it leads to some other wrestlers in AEW who are just completely inactive and away from AEW for months at a time with no explanation. And it is currently April 2025, and there are a few wrestlers in AEW who haven't appeared in AEW or even Ring of Honor for the entire calendar year. They've been unexplainably missing with no known reason for absence, and one could presume they are away from AEW TV because AEW simply has no plans in mind for them and no idea what to do with them. So like the video as we talk about the wrestlers who have been unexplainably missing from AEW for all of 2025 so far, as the first person we're talking about is a wrestler who has had maybe one of the weirdest AEW runs ever, and before being a wrestler, he was a boxer. We're talking about Anthony Ogogo. So Anthony Ogogo signed for AEW in October 2019 in AEW's first year, and I remember Anthony Ogogo being kind of presented as AEW's first developmental project, because as I alluded to earlier, Anthony Ogogo had no wrestling experience. Instead, he was a boxer before coming to AEW. In fact, he was a very talented boxer. He had a record of 11-1 and had world championship aspirations, but he unfortunately had to retire and end his boxing career early, as in his one and only loss and last fight, he fractured his eye socket, which he was never able to fully recover from, being legally registered blind and being forced to retire from boxing. But he made his way to AEW that same year, being a trainee of the Nightmare Factory, and would make his AEW debut on the 31st of March 2021 Dynamite after about a year or two of training. And of course, he made his debut feuding with Cody Rhodes as he aligned himself with QT Marshall and other Nightmare Factory students to form the Factory, and Anthony Ogogo would pick up some wins, knocking his opponents out in a build-up to a match against Cody Rhodes at Double or Nothing, which had some awful build-up with that terribly awkward weigh-in segment, and the match itself was pretty dull, with Cody Rhodes getting the win, and many people feeling as though he probably shouldn't have, which is kind of a funny thing to say and look back on now, but that was the general consensus at the time, was that Anthony Ogogo should have won this match. Anthony Ogogo would then go away from AEW TV for a bit to get an eye surgery, and when he did come back, he was just borderline in a jobber lower card role, as the Factory were a complete dud of a stable and were mainstays of AEW Dark. And once Dark got axed by AEW, Anthony Ogogo was absent from AEW TV for nearly 2 years, as he finally returned to AEW TV as a part of Shane Taylor Promotions in 2024, which I thought was a pretty good spot for him to be in. And it meant that he got to have matches and appearances on TV, on Dynamite and Collision, and they did some stuff on Ring of Honor together, as obviously Shane Taylor Promotions are more part of Ring of Honor, but it was a good spot for Ogogo to be in. However, he just abruptly stopped appearing with Shane Taylor Promotions, as whenever Shane Taylor Promotions are on AEW or Ring of Honor, Anthony Ogogo just isn't there anymore, and in fact, he's not been seen in AEW or Ring of Honor since the 31st of August 2024 episode of Ring of Honor. I don't really get why Anthony Ogogo was dropped from Shane Taylor Promotions. I thought that was a great spot for him to be in. From what I can tell, there's no known or reported injuries or visa issues similar to Jamie Hayter or anything like that. I did see himself and his partner welcomed a newborn child in September, so that could explain his initial absence from AEW, but one would have to assume that the reason he's not appearing in AEW currently is because AEW simply just has nothing for him and don't really know what to do with him, many such cases. But yeah, Anthony Ogogo's absence from AEW TV for nearly 8 months now is completely unknown. Maybe the reasons are undisclosed, but I was enjoying Anthony Ogogo in Shane Taylor Promotions. I thought they were a good fit, so it's a shame that that just abruptly got dropped. And speaking of AEW acts catching on that I was enjoying that completely got vanished from TV, Anna Jay, that's someone who I thought was really catching momentum at the start of 2024, but has just completely vanished and not been seen at all for all of 2025. Anna Jay, of course, originally signed for AEW during the pandemic in 2020, and she would join the heel group The Dark Order, being led by Brody Lee. She also started teaming up with Ty Conti, or Ty Mello now at this time, as they were Ty J, and her first couple of years in the Dark Order were a good introduction for Anna Jay to AEW, as she was still coming up in wrestling and developing, and she did some really cool stuff during her early days in AEW as well. Of course, at the end of 2021, herself and Ty Mello had that awesome street fight against Penelope Ford and the Bunny, and she had some good matches against Jade Cargill for the TBS Championship, including a main event and one at Double or Nothing. But she unfortunately got sucked into the Jericho Vortex following this, as she would join the Jericho Appreciation Society, and even changed her name to Anna JAS, which I thought was funny at the time, but looking back at now, that's a bit egregious, I think. And I'll be honest, I don't think the JAS was a bad spot for her to be in. They were a big part of TV, and during their lifespan, the JAS weren't a bad part of TV. In fact, the only issue with the JAS is that they just overstayed their welcome, and that a lot of the members following the JAS didn't really do much afterwards. Anna Jay's most notable moment in the JAS was, of course, herself and Mello once again in another street fight, this time against Soho and Willow Nightingale on Rampage, another classic. And after Anna Jay left the JAS in 2023, it left her in a bit of booking limbo, where she was kind of just floating around on the AEW roster, not really doing all that much of anything notable. AEW seemingly had nothing for her. She had a brief stint with the Outcasts for a bit as well, but then she would actually go away from AEW TV as she went on excursion to Stardom in Japan. And if you don't know, going away on excursion to Stardom in Japan as a women's wrestler from America is a pretty big deal, and it's a great way to help develop your career, and many women's wrestlers have gone on to become huge names in the industry following doing this. And when Anna Jay eventually did return to AEW, there was a noticeable improvement in Anna Jay, and people were engaged in Anna Jay's matches, and she was definitely one to look out for now. She had a women's title program with Mariah May where she defeated her in a title eliminator match at Battle of the Belts, and she would face her for the title in 2 different matches on Collision, including a main event, I believe. And obviously she was unsuccessful, but the matches were good and a great showing for Anna Jay, and she would have yet another title match in AEW at the end of that year, when she would then challenge Mercedes Moné for the TBS Championship, in another great showing from Anna Jay and a good match for the TBS title. But since then, just hasn't been seen in AEW. She hasn't been seen for the entirety of 2025 now. From what I know, there is no known injury or any reason why she's gone from AEW. I just once again have to assume AEW has nothing for her. It seems as though they threw her at both champions a bit too soon, as she challenged for both women's belts within like a month apart of each other, lost both of them of course, and since then I guess AEW just doesn't know what to do with her. And it's a shame, because it's been 5 months now since we've seen her, and she was really catching on and getting some huge momentum, and it really felt like she was developing, but now it's just been completely halted. It feels like a complete waste, and I really feel as though Anna Jay could be a great homegrown star for AEW, but AEW just has no idea what to even do with her. But hey, it's just another case of the Jericho Vortex, I suppose. And speaking of other cases of the Jericho Vortex, Ortiz is definitely one of those. Ortiz debuted for AEW in a huge way alongside his proud and powerful partner Santana at All Out 2019, as they established themselves as seemingly one of the top tag teams in the division by attacking the Young Bucks. They would then join Chris Jericho's Inner Circle on the first episode of AEW Dynamite, and this was a great spot for them to be in at the start. Emphasis on at the start, as Ortiz and Santana would defeat the Young Bucks on their pay-per-view debut at Full Gear, and that was probably the biggest win they ever got as a tag team right there in that moment. As Ortiz and Santana for the next couple of years during the Inner Circle's lifespan were just members and guests of the Jericho Vortex. They had a nice rent-free stay as side characters in the Jericho-verse, and it was just a pretty dire spot for them to be in. win, and when the Inner Circle exploded and became the Jericho Appreciation Society and started feuding with the Blackpool Combat Club and Eddie Kingston, Ortiz and Santana would involve themselves in that feud as well, as they defeated the Jericho Appreciation Society at Blood and Guts in easily their biggest win in AEW to date, with Santana unfortunately picking up an injury in that match. Ortiz would stay on TV, appearing alongside Eddie Kingston and doing matches, even teaming with Ruby Soho, with it being reported behind the scenes that Ortiz and Santana had personal issues and it wouldn't be looking like they were teaming up anymore. They would both compete as part of the Stadium Stampede at the 2023 All-In event as part of Team Blackpool Combat Club, losing that match, and then they would have a Rampage match to fully solidify their breakup as a tag team, with Santana getting the win. Yes, all they got was a Rampage match. And then Ortiz's last match with AEW would take place on the 20th of January 2024 Collision, as he teamed up with Eddie Kingston, losing to the Blackpool Combat Club, and he's not been seen in AEW since, as he did have an injury, which was obviously a very major one as it left him out of action for over a year. But Ortiz has since made his return to wrestling this past March, just this last month, and is back active again, so it begs the question, will we be seeing Ortiz appearing in AEW very soon? I'm sure we will, I'm defo sure we will. However, I'm just really unsure of what they're gonna do with Ortiz. For me, I think maybe the Don Callis family could be a good spot for him to be in, but that's just throwing him in another stable. But the issue is, I just don't know what his ceiling is as a single star in AEW. Maybe they have him team up with Eddie Kingston when Eddie Kingston is back, but who knows when Eddie Kingston is gonna be back. For now, Ortiz is on the shelf. I do give AEW the benefit of the doubt that they don't just have no ideas for him, because he's only been returned to wrestling for only a month, so maybe he's just getting his reps in before coming back to AEW, but time will tell if AEW can come up with any creative for him, and time will tell for all of these. Anna Jay, Anthony Ogogo, and some other honorable mentions that I came up with that I'm not going to talk about in full for this video, of other wrestlers that I don't really know why they're off AEW TV other than presumed AEW having no idea for them. There's Wardlow, Scorpio Sky, Danhausen. I didn't mention them because I've mentioned them so many times in videos recently. There's Kota Ibushi, who I forgot was even technically signed to AEW, but he's on the AEW roster page. There is The Blade, who I can't remember the last time I saw him on AEW. I've seen The Butcher, but not The Blade. And then there's Jack Perry, who I have a strange feeling is going to be the wild card in the Owen Hart tournament, which is tonight against Adam Page as I'm filming this. Maybe him and Anna Jay are going to be paired up together on screen. That it could be a little prediction right there. But yeah, that is everyone I could think of. Let me know in the comments down below if there's anyone you can think of that is missing from AEW TV. And leave a like on this video if you did enjoy, and subscribe with notifications on so you never miss a video on the Top 10 Wrestling channel. I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye, and keep on rolling.